The elevator doors opened to a hospital room that smelled like antiseptic and something worse. The particular silence of a place where people came to disappear. Meredith Ashby stood in the doorway in the dress she'd worn to her own board meeting 6 hours earlier, her new husband's name still warm on the marriage certificate folded in her purse. The man she'd married that morning, the one the lawyers had described as a construction supervisor from South Boston, was standing at the bedside of a patient she didn't recognize, speaking in low, urgent tones to a specialist who kept calling him Dr. Ashby, not Mr. Ashby, not Sir, Doctor. "Close the door," he said without turning around, the same way he'd said everything else since she'd met him. Quiet. Certain. Like a man who had never once in his life needed to raise his voice to be heard. That was the moment Meredith realized the contract she'd signed wasn't what she thought it was. But she's getting ahead of herself. Let me take you back to where this really started. 4 weeks before that hospital corridor. 4 weeks before everything she thought she understood about her life turned out to be the rough draft. The conference room at Ashby Capital smelled like old leather and new money, which was exactly the smell Meredith Ashby had been chasing since she was 12 years old and watching her mother count change at the kitchen table of their apartment in Dorchester. She'd worn the navy blazer, the one her assistant Petra called the closer, because every time Meredith put it on, something significant happened. Today she needed significant. "The board is prepared to invoke the succession clause," said Gideon Taft, the family attorney, whose silver hair and $500 reading glasses made him look like someone who collected antique maps for fun and definitely did not have fun. "Your grandfather's will is explicit. To retain controlling interest in Ashby Capital upon his death, the primary heir must be married." Meredith had known this was coming, had known it for 11 months, since her grandfather Franklin Ashby had slipped into the decline that eventually took him. Had known it the way you know a storm is building when the air changes. Not quite rain yet, but unmistakably coming. "And the timeline?" she asked. 60 days from the reading of the will, you have 43 remaining. 43 days to get married. To find a person willing to sign their name next to hers and stand in a room and make promises neither of them intended to keep. What exactly does the clause require? Gideon exchanged a glance with his associate, a sharp-featured woman named Constance, who had not smiled once since Meredith walked in and gave the impression that smiling was something she'd tried once and found inefficient. A legally recognized marriage. The board will expect the spouse to appear at quarterly events. Beyond that, the arrangement can be, Constance paused. Private. You want me to find a husband in 6 weeks. We want you to retain control of a company your grandfather spent 40 years building. Gideon's voice was not unkind, just honest in the way people were honest when the truth served their purposes. Without the clause satisfied, the board transfers controlling interest to a consortium of secondary investors who will, in our professional estimation, dismantle Ashby Capital within 18 months. Meredith looked at her hands. She'd spent 15 years building this company into something her grandfather could be proud of. 15 years of 7 a.m. calls and red-eye flights and meals, eaten standing over her kitchen counter because sitting down felt like losing momentum. She wasn't going to lose it to a clause in a dead man's will. "Tell me about the candidate," she said. Another glance between Gideon and Constance. This one communicated something she couldn't read. "His name is Declan Voss. He's 38. He works construction management for a firm in South Boston. No record, no social media to speak of. He has a 7-year-old daughter. His wife passed away 4 years ago." "Why him?" "He came to us. Through channels." Gideon removed his glasses. "He has his own reasons for wanting a temporary arrangement, which he'll explain if you agree to meet him. He specifically requested someone outside the usual social circles. Someone without prior connections to his history. His history. 2 words that carried the weight of an entire story she wasn't being told. "I need to meet him first," Meredith said. Constance's expression suggested she'd expected this and found it mildly inconvenient. "Of course. Tomorrow, 11 a.m. He's agreed to come to you." She almost asked what kind of man with a daughter voluntarily walked into a temporary marriage arrangement. Then she remembered she was the kind of woman who was considering it and stopped asking questions about character. Declan Voss arrived 4 minutes early, which told her something. Men who needed the arrangement more than she did arrived early. Men who were doing her a favor arrived late. He was tall, not in a dramatic way, just noticeably present. He wore a gray shirt and dark jeans and looked like someone who worked outside in all weather and had stopped noticing. His hands, when he shook hers, were calloused in a specific way that didn't match the handshake, controlled, practiced. Not a construction worker's grip, something more precise. "Ms. Ashby," he said. His voice was quiet, the kind of quiet that wasn't uncertain, just economical. Mr. Voss, sit down. He did. He looked around her office the way people looked at places they'd been in versions of before. Familiar with the architecture, if not the specific room. Gideon tells me you have your own reasons for this arrangement, she said. I'd like to hear them, and I'd like to know if you're serious about it before I explain them. He looked at her steadily. I don't share information about my situation with people who haven't decided what they want. She'd been managed by enough board members to recognize someone setting terms. Under different circumstances, it would have annoyed her. Right now, it earned a measure of respect. I'm serious, Meredith said. 43 days or I lose my company. That's serious enough. He nodded once, like she'd passed something. I need a legal identity. Specifically, a marriage record that changes my last name and gives me a legitimate reason to appear in certain contexts, medical contexts, without being questioned. He paused. I have a daughter. Her name is Wren. She's 7, and she has a condition that requires treatment from a specialist who won't see patients without a family referral from within the hospital network. The specialist I need is at Brigham. I've been trying to get access for 14 months, and as your wife, I'd provide that access. Your grandfather sat on the hospital board for 30 years. Your name opens doors. His voice didn't carry bitterness or resentment, just fact. I'm not asking for anything else, except a marriage, except the legal record of one, yes. Meredith studied him. He didn't look away, didn't fidget, didn't do the thing people did when they were lying, which was convince themselves they had nothing to hide by making too much eye contact. His gaze was just steady. You're asking me to trust you with my name and I know nothing about you, she said. Fair. Ask what you want to know. What happened to your wife? The pause before he answered was not evasive. It was the pause of someone who'd answered this question many times and had figured out how to tell the truth without bleeding on the floor. She died of cardiac arrest. She was 33. A beat. Wren was 3. I'm sorry. Thank you. No performance in it. Just the short, honest acknowledgement of someone who'd learned to accept condolence without making it into a moment. What exactly is wrong with your daughter? Something changed in his expression. The careful neutrality that had held his face together since he sat down shifted, and underneath it was something raw and certain. The first real thing she'd seen from him. She has a rare autoimmune condition affecting her neurological development. There's a researcher at Brigham, Dr. Finch, who has the only treatment protocol showing meaningful results. Without his program, he stopped, gathered. Continued, the timeline matters. The way he said his daughter's name, or rather the way he'd said she, protecting it, keeping it contained, told Meredith more than any background check could. Whatever else was true about Declan Voss, he was a man who would do anything for his child. I'll need to meet her, Meredith said. Something flickered across his face. Protectiveness, then calculation, then something else she couldn't name. I'll arrange it. But I'll tell you now, she doesn't need someone new walking into her life and then walking out. If you meet her, you're present, even if it's just. He searched for the right word. Parishional. Meredith had grown up with a mother who worked doubles at a hospital laundry facility and still came home and helped her with homework. She understood what showing up meant, and she understood what it meant when people didn't. Understood, she said. I don't do peripheral. The thing that might have been surprise crossed his face and disappeared. He picked up a pen from her desk, wrote a number on the edge of a notepad. Saturday, 10 a.m. We're near Castle Island. He stood. And Ms. Ashby, if you come to meet her, not to decide about me. He left her office, and Meredith sat for a long moment looking at the number on her notepad, thinking about a 7-year-old girl and a man who carried his grief like a tool rather than a wound. Castle Island on a Saturday in October was half empty, the tourists gone, and the locals out walking dogs and running. The water was steel gray and honest. Declan was already there when she arrived. Sitting on a bench near the water, a small girl next to him with braids and a puffy orange jacket, and what appeared to be a running monologue about seagulls. She heard the child before she saw her clearly, specific, opinionated, unafraid. The one on the left is following the other one, but the other one doesn't know yet, and that's probably how birds feel all the time, which is why they look worried even when they're not doing anything. Wren. Declan's voice was fond in a way his face in Meredith's office had not allowed for. Entirely different. Entirely human. We have company. The little girl turned and looked at Meredith with the kind of sustained, unblinking assessment only children managed without it becoming rude. She had her father's eyes, that same quality of taking things in carefully before offering anything back. Hello, Wren said, serious as a judge. Are you the lady from Dad's work? Something like that, Meredith said. I'm Meredith. I'm Wren. Like the bird, but I'm not named after the bird. I'm named after my grandmother, whose name was also Wren. So technically, I'm named after a person who was named after a bird. She considered this. Do you like birds? I don't have strong feelings either way. Wren nodded, like this was a reasonable and respectable position. That's okay. I'll tell you about them. The one on the left has been following the other one for 20 minutes. I think it's looking for something. What do you think it's looking for? Wren said it plainly, without sentiment, the way children said true things before they learned to wrap them in qualifications. Meredith sat down on the bench. Declan watched her with that same careful expression he'd worn in her office, except softer now, like the presence of his daughter had turned a setting down somewhere inside him. She could feel him watching, not threatening, just attentive. Testing, she realized, seeing how she responded to Wren, checking whether she'd treat his daughter like a charming anecdote or an actual person. She spent 40 minutes talking to a 7-year-old about seagull sociology, the structural integrity of sandcastles, and the question of whether fish knew they were wet. Walking back to their cars, Declan fell into step beside her. She likes you, he said. She doesn't usually talk that much with strangers. She doesn't seem like someone who knows she's supposed to be guarded. She's not. I never taught her that. Something in his voice. I don't want her to learn it. They stopped at the edge of the parking lot. The wind off the harbor was sharp and clean. I'll sign the contract, Meredith said, but I'm not going to pretend Wren doesn't exist. If I'm in your home, I'm present. He looked at her for a moment. I remember what I said. Then we understand each other. We do, he paused. And Ms. Ashby, don't let her talk you into adopting a seagull. She'll try. Has she tried before? Twice. He opened his car door. Third time might be yours. The wedding happened on a Thursday morning at City Hall, which smelled like floor wax and other people's paperwork. Meredith wore a cream coat she'd owned for 7 years and had been saving for nothing in particular. Declan wore dark slacks and a charcoal shirt like a man who knew what appropriate meant and considered that sufficient. No flowers. No guests except the mandatory witnesses. Gideon Constance, a courthouse clerk named Terrence, who was running on what appeared to be his 4th coffee of the morning. Do you, Meredith Eleanor Ashby, take this man? She looked at Declan. He was looking back at her with that same careful, neutral expression. A man keeping something controlled. I do. Handshake to seal it. No kiss by prior agreement. Efficient, businesslike, correct. Married Meredith Ashby was married to a construction manager from South Boston she'd known for 11 days. Outside on the courthouse steps, her phone buzzed with a notification from Ashby Capital's board secretary. Succession clause satisfied. Controlling interest confirmed. She'd bought herself a company with a signature. The question was what the signature was actually buying her in return. The house wasn't what she'd expected. She'd assumed, practical, a little worn, the functional home of a man raising a child on a single income. What she found was a 3-story brownstone in the South End, renovated with the kind of precision and taste that cost money, the right kind of money. Books everywhere. A drafting table in the study covered in what looked like architectural drawings, not construction specs. Framed drawings of bones on the walls of the hallway, vertebrae, joints, complex anatomical sketches, rendered with the careful accuracy of someone who had studied them seriously. Construction managers don't usually have anatomy drawings in their hallways, Meredith said. I have varied interests, Declan said, and moved to put her bags in the guest room, which was already prepared, which meant he'd made this decision before she confirmed it. He'd been confident she'd say yes. Or he'd hoped hard enough that preparation felt like faith. A woman appeared from the kitchen, mid-50s, soft-faced, with the hands of someone who'd spent years taking care of people, practically and instinctively. She introduced herself as Frances, who watched Wren during the days. Wren herself appeared at full velocity from upstairs. You came. Dad said you might not come, but I knew you would because you don't seem like someone who changes their mind. Meredith looked at Declan over his daughter's head. He was watching her with an expression that gave nothing away and said everything. I don't, Meredith agreed. Good, come see my room. I made you a drawing. The drawing was of 2 seagulls sitting on a bench. Underneath it, in careful 7-year-old printing, the one on the right found someone to sit with. Meredith looked at it for a long time. When she looked up, Declan was standing in the doorway. That controlled expression had slipped, just slightly, like he hadn't expected his daughter to do that, or had expected it and was unprepared for what it meant. She's a remarkable kid, Meredith said. I know. His voice was quiet. I know she is. The arrangement settled into a rhythm over the first weeks. Meredith went to Ashby Capital. Declan disappeared to wherever he went, which ostensibly involved construction, but increasingly did not feel like construction. He returned each evening. He cooked dinner, and not the basic, functional cooking of a man trying to keep a child fed, but actual cooking, patient and precise, the kind of cooking that required paying attention. It was Francis who started filling in the edges. He wasn't always in construction, she said one morning while Wren was at school. She said it the way people said things they'd been holding for a while. Before Wren got sick, before his wife, he was different. He used to work downtown. She paused. Different kind of work. What kind? Francis's expression shifted, not evasive, but careful. The particular careful of someone who'd been asked not to answer certain questions. You'd have to ask him, and he won't tell you yet. But she looked at Meredith steadily. He will, eventually. He's a person who does things when he's decided to do them, not before. That night, Meredith found Declan in the study after Wren was asleep, bent over the drafting table under a single lamp. She brought 2 cups of coffee without asking. He looked up, and she set one near his elbow without comment. He looked at the coffee, then at her. What's on the table isn't construction specs, she said. No, the anatomy drawings in the hall, also not decorative. She sat in the chair across from the drafting table, cradling her mug. I'm going to find out eventually. I'd rather hear it from you. He was quiet for a moment. Then he reached over and opened a drawer, pulled out something she recognized as a credential wallet, the kind physicians carried. He slid it across the table. She opened it, his photo, his name, and after it, MD, PhD, neurological surgery. Brigham and Women's Hospital, board certified. She read it twice. Read the dates. Read the specialty. You're a neurosurgeon, she said. I was. What happened? Someone tried to make sure I couldn't practice anymore, not because of something I did, because of something I knew. He took the credential back. 3 years ago, I was building a case, evidence of clinical fraud, a consortium of research investors manipulating trial data to protect a treatment protocol that was actively harming patients. People were dying, children. Something moved through his expression. I went to the right people. And before I could formally disclose, my license was flagged for a fabricated ethics violation. Investigation opened. Career paused indefinitely. Meredith sat very still. And your wife? She died 6 months after the investigation began. His voice was flat. The flatness of someone who had learned to say something terrible without falling apart through repetition. The coroner ruled cardiac arrest. I've always wondered if it was more than that. He looked at his hands. I couldn't prove it. And I had a 3-year-old who needed me alive and careful. The silence sat between them like something solid. So you became a construction manager. I became invisible. It's different. A pause. And I kept track of Wren's condition, found Dr. Finch's work 2 years ago. His protocol is the only thing with genuine results for her presentation. Without your name getting me into that program. He stopped. Without my name, she doesn't get treatment. Without your name, she gets worse. He met her eyes. I need you to know what you're involved in. Not because the contract requires it, but because you're living in my house and you're part of Wren's days and you deserve to understand what you walked into. Meredith thought about this. About a man who had seen people harmed by corrupt science and paid for trying to stop it. About a little girl drawing seagulls, finding someone to sit with. Tell me what you know, she said. All of it. He told her. It took 2 hours and 3 refills of coffee. By the end, she had a clear picture of a conspiracy that stretched from clinical research through hospital administration, through investment networks that she recognized, because some of those networks intersected at the edges, with firms she knew. You know some of these people, Declan said. He'd noticed when she recognized names, professionally. From the outside, she set her mug down. Did it occur to you that marrying into Ashby Capital might have given you access you didn't anticipate? A pause. Yes? Were you planning to use it? Another pause. Longer. I was planning to see if I could trust you first. She looked at him across the drafting table with all its careful evidence. A man who'd given up everything trying to do the right thing and was now doing something legally ambiguous to save his daughter. You should have led with that, she said. I didn't know you yet, fair. She stood, picked up both empty mugs. Then let's start figuring out if you can trust me. The next morning she went to Ashby Capital, closed her office door, and spent 4 hours reviewing the investment network she'd recognized. She found the edges, the overlaps. Names that appeared in Declan's evidence appearing in her firm's peripheral deal histories. She called Petra in. I need everything we have on a group of research investment vehicles from the last 6 years. Flag anything with cross-holdings in hospital administration or clinical trial licensing. Petra didn't ask why. Petra was the kind of assistant who understood that when her boss closed her door for 4 hours, the result was always urgent. By the time Meredith got home, she had a clearer picture and a heavier feeling in her chest. Declan was in the kitchen. Wren was at the table doing homework. the specific fierce concentration of a child who was trying very hard because she understood, in the vague way children understood things, that it mattered. "You look like something happened," Wren said without looking up. "Something's always happening," Meredith said. "How's the math? Annoying." Wren looked up. "Is it something bad?" "Something complicated. Those are different things." "Yes," Meredith agreed. "They are." She looked at Declan over Wren's head. He was already looking at her, reading her expression with that clinical attention. After dinner, the study, he nodded once. Dinner happened. Wren talked about her school project, which involved the migratory patterns of birds and had apparently been approved by her teacher despite being, according to Wren, technically more advanced than what we're supposed to be doing, but she said I could go ahead because I'd already started. Declan helped her with it while Meredith cleared the table, and she watched them without meaning to. This father who checked for detail with the same precision he brought to everything. And this child who somehow both needed his care and was fundamentally unbreakable. After Wren was asleep, Meredith laid out what she'd found on the drafting table next to his evidence. 3 of the investment vehicles in your documentation have secondary holdings in companies that have placed assets with Ashby Capital in the last 4 years, she said. Which means if your case surfaces, there's a version where it blows back on my firm. I didn't know that, Declan said. I believe you. She did. It also means I have standing to investigate. Protective, legal, corporate standing, which changes what we can do. He looked at the papers, then at her. We. Another pause. You understand what you're taking on. I understand that there are people profiting from harm to children. And I understand that I have resources you don't have. She met his eyes. And I understand that Wren needs Dr. Finch's program, which takes 8 weeks to begin showing results, and her last evaluation wasn't good. His expression cracked, just for a second. She saw underneath the control to the fear that drove everything, the relentless, grinding fear of a parent watching a clock. She's getting worse, he said. Quiet, slowly, but she's getting worse. Then we move faster. They move faster. Meredith used her board access to pull historical records. Declan used connections from his previous life, research colleagues who'd been quietly suspicious for years, waiting for someone with enough standing to make a move. Petra, who turned out to have a law degree she'd never fully deployed, became the 3rd member of what Meredith privately thought of as the least likely investigative team in Boston. At work, a different battle was brewing. Devon Hartley, Ashby Capital's vice chair and the member of the board most invested in the status quo, had begun questioning Meredith's decision-making. Too many questions about her new information requests, pointed comments in meetings. He's positioning, Petra told her, has been since your grandfather died. He expected the succession clause to create a crisis. When it didn't, he started looking for another angle. Let him look. Meredith thought about what Declan had told her. Don't play defense when you can play offense. Schedule a board review for the end of the month. I want to present a full audit of the firm's investment history. Petra raised an eyebrow. That's aggressive. He's being aggressive. I'm just being accurate. At home, things shifted in ways she hadn't anticipated. She started joining Wren for breakfast. Wren started saving drawings for her return each evening, not deliberately, but naturally, the way children naturally incorporated reliable people into their routines. She started asking Meredith to read to her at bedtime when Declan was on calls with his former colleagues. One night, Meredith was reading about a family of sparrows who moved to a new city and had to figure out who they were when Wren looked up at her with those serious eyes. Are you going to stay after the time's up? She asked. The air in the room changed. What time? Meredith asked. The 2 years. Frances said it was 2 years. Wren looked at her without accusation, just the clear-eyed assessment of a child who'd already lost one person and was cataloging the odds. Are you going to leave like my mom did? Meredith sat with that question, with the weight of what it was really asking. Your mom didn't leave because she wanted to, she said. And the 2-year thing, plans change, people change. The only thing I can promise you is that I will tell you the truth, always, even when it's hard. Wren considered this. Okay, then can you do the Sparrow Dad's voice higher? You keep making him sound too serious. He's supposed to be funny. Meredith made the Sparrow Dad's voice higher. Wren laughed, and something in Meredith's chest quietly stopped pretending this was temporary. The board audit happened on a Tuesday. Meredith presented 4 years of cross-referenced investment data, highlighted the problematic holdings, and laid out, clearly without drama, the case for divesting from the flagged vehicles before they became a regulatory liability. Devon Hartley's objections were immediate and aggressive. You're creating a problem that doesn't exist, he said, his voice carrying the particular confidence of a man who'd never been wrong in a room, because the room had always been full of people willing to let him be right. These investments have performed consistently. The idea that there's I'm not asking the board to take my word for it, Meredith said. I've requested a formal review by an independent forensic accounting firm. The documentation is on page 14. The room went quiet. Devin Hartley was not used to having documentation placed in front of him. Patricia Osey, one of the board members who had quietly supported Meredith since her grandfather's death, spoke next. I move we authorize the independent review. It passed 5-2. Afterward, Patricia caught up with her in the corridor. He's going to escalate, she said. Devin doesn't concede. He repositions. I know. Meredith thought about Wren asking if she was going to stay, about Declan's face when he said she's getting worse. Let him reposition. I'll be standing in the same place. That evening she came home to find Declan at the kitchen table with Wren, helping her construct a model bird nest for the school project. Wren was entirely focused. Declan looked up when she walked in, and she could see the question in his expression before she said anything. 5-2, she said. Something in his face eased, just slightly. And Devin Hartley? We'll try again, but we'll be ready. Wren looked up. Who's Devin Hartley? Someone who doesn't like change, Meredith said. Dad and I don't like him either, Wren decided, having met him 0 times and counting 0%. Do you want to help with the nest? We need somebody to hold it while we tie the outside. Meredith sat down and held the nest. The crisis arrived on a Friday morning in the form of a call from a blocked number. A man's voice, measured, pleasant in the way that pleasant became threatening. He said his name was Conrad. He said he knew what Meredith and her husband were building. He said the people who'd been patient for 3 years were done being patient. He said Wren was enrolled in a school in the South End, and she usually left at 3:15. The call lasted 40 seconds. When it ended, Meredith sat at her desk for exactly 30 seconds, then called Declan. They made contact, she said. No panic in his voice. She'd expected some fear, urgency, but what she got was the voice of someone shifting into a mode they'd prepared for. What did they say? She told him. Get in your car. Don't go back to the house. Go to the Marriott on Stewart Street and stay in the lobby. I'll call you in 20 minutes, Declan. I know where Wren is. She's safe. There were precautions in place. A beat. I need you to trust me. 20 minutes later, she knew everything. The precautions. A second set of people watching Wren's school. A protocol he'd built and revised and tested over 3 years of careful paranoia. A contact in the district attorney's office who'd been waiting for exactly this kind of overt threat. Former colleagues from his hospital life, who it turned out were not entirely unaffiliated with federal regulatory bodies. You've been building toward this, Meredith said. I've been building a case. For 3 years, he met her eyes. I needed the threat to surface because the threat is evidence. What Conrad said to you, we have the call, we have the number, we have his real name. A pause. And now we have your board documentation as corroboration. You used me to draw them out. The silence before he answered was not comfortable. I hoped the documentation would be enough on its own. I didn't engineer the threat. He held her gaze. But I'd be lying if I said I didn't know this was possible. She should have felt manipulated. She looked at him across the hotel lobby. This man who'd spent 3 years protecting his daughter by becoming invisible, who'd given up a career and a name and built something new from the edges of the life he used to have. You told me the truth before it mattered, she said. That counts for something. Does it? Yes. She picked up her coffee. Now tell me what happens next. What happened next was 2 weeks of coordinated escalation that Meredith participated in as a full partner and not a managed variable. She provided testimony to federal investigators about the investment connections. She authorized Ashby Capital's internal records to be used as part of the broader documentation package. Devin Hartley resigned from the board on a Tuesday morning, 9 minutes before federal investigators made it mandatory. The consortium began to collapse from the outside in, and on a Wednesday afternoon, Dr. Finch's office called to schedule Wren's intake appointment. Meredith was there for the appointment. She drove Wren herself, Declan in the passenger seat, and Wren in the back asking detailed questions about the hospital architecture as they pulled in. It's big, Wren said. Is it scary inside? No, Meredith said. It's full of people who are very good at their jobs. Is Dad one of them? The question landed in the car like a dropped coin, clear and specific. Meredith looked at Declan. He was already looking at her. Something shifted between them. What do you know? He said to Wren carefully. Wren shrugged with the elaborate casualness of a child who'd known something for a while. Frances calls you Dr. Voss sometimes when she forgets she's not supposed to. And you have all those drawing of bones, and you always know exactly what the doctors say about me before they explain it. She paused. Also, I heard you on the phone once talking about surgical approaches, and I looked it up. She looked up. Is that why we're here? Because you know the doctor? Something like that, Declan said. His voice was not quite steady. Okay, Wren considered. I think that's good. I think that means you've been trying to help me for a long time. Declan's expression broke open, just for a moment, clean and undefended. Yeah, he said, a long time. Wren patted his arm with the matter-of-fact comfort of a child who understood things in their bones. It's okay, Dad. I knew you were. She looked at Meredith. Did you know? I found out eventually, Meredith said. But you stayed. Wren nodded, satisfied. Good. I told the seagull you would. The weeks after the intake appointment settled into something new. Declan began the process of formally reinstating his credentials, the investigation against him dismantled by the same evidence that brought down the consortium. The hospital reached out carefully, then with more urgency. He was, it turned out, the kind of neurological surgeon who left a hole in a field when he disappeared. He went back. Part-time first, then more. He was different at the hospital than he was at home, more formal, more contained. But Meredith watched him once through the glass of a consultation room and understood. This was what the precision was for, the careful, economical movements. The quality of attention that missed nothing. He'd been this all along. Even when he was pretending to be something smaller, the contract technically had 18 months remaining. Nobody mentioned it. Meredith moved more things to the South End brownstone quietly, without announcement, the way you moved into a life when you'd stopped thinking of yourself as passing through. One evening in December, Wren was asleep, and Frances had gone home, and they were in the study, papers spread out between them but not being worked on, when Declan said, "The contract." "Yes," Meredith said. "It expires in 14 months, I know." He looked at his hands. The calloused hands that she now understood were calloused from construction work he'd taken on to survive, not from the career he'd built before. "I don't want you to feel like you have to stay past what you agreed to. I don't feel that way. I'm serious. You came into this for your company. You've secured that. The board is stable. Devon is gone. There's no practical reason for the arrangement to continue. Are you trying to end the arrangement?" He looked up. "No, I'm trying to give you permission to." She thought about how much this man had practiced saying things that hurt him because he thought it was right. About his daughter who'd learned to ask questions instead of assuming. About a 7-year-old who'd left a drawing on Meredith's desk last week of a seagull with a graduation cap that said Dr. Wren, because Wren had decided she was also going to be a doctor. "Declan," Meredith said. "I fell in love with your daughter first, completely, without planning to, and then she stopped. I realized what I actually felt about you was quieter than I expected. Not less, just quieter. Like it had been building without asking my permission." He was very still. "I'm not staying because the contract requires it," she said. "I'm staying because I don't want to leave, and because Wren thinks I've been sitting on this bench with her from the beginning, and I don't want her to be wrong." He crossed the room in 3 steps and kissed her. And it was not the kind of kiss of a business arrangement, dissolving. It was the kind of kiss of 2 people who'd been standing at the edge of something real and had finally agreed to look down. The second wedding happened in April, on a Saturday, in the brownstone's back garden that Wren had spent 2 weeks decorating with paper birds, all sizes, cranes and sparrows, and one extremely ambitious pelican that had taken her 4 attempts. Small, just Frances and Petra and Dr. Finch and 3 of Declan's former research colleagues who'd waited 3 years for this particular outcome and wore their best clothes to prove it. Wren was the flower girl. She took the job with the seriousness of a child who understood that this one was real. She'd worn a green dress because, she explained, birds lived in green things, and this was a bird-themed wedding, obviously. When the justice of the peace asked if they took each other, they both said yes, like they meant it. Because the first time, they'd been strangers making a transaction, and this time, they were people who had walked through something real together and come out holding hands. Wren threw petals with absolute precision, one at a time, because she'd calculated the correct distribution in advance. The reception was soup and bread in the kitchen, because Wren had been very firm about what made a good party. Later, after Wren was asleep and the guests had gone and the kitchen was cleaned, they sat on the back step of the brownstone in the April night, shoulders touching. "I came into this thinking I was buying time," Meredith said. 43 days. A signature. A solution. And now? She looked at the paper birds that still hung from the garden strings, turning slowly in the night air. "Now I know that the things worth having usually start as something else. A problem. A deadline. A stranger on a bench who says a thing about seagulls that you can't stop thinking about." He laughed, actually laughed, and she still wasn't used to how different it made his face. "My daughter said that. Your daughter is smarter than both of us. Considerably." He took her hand. I spent 3 years planning the next move, protective, calculating, always the next step. It's how I survived, and now? He looked at her. Now I want to be the kind of man who doesn't need to survive, who can just be here. A pause. You made that feel possible. She thought about this. About the girl she'd been in Dorchester, counting change with her mother, and believing that one day she'd build something large enough that the counting would stop. She'd built it. 15 years of relentless construction. She hadn't thought about what came after the building. It turned out what came after was this: a brownstone in the South End, paper birds in a garden, a daughter who took attendance seriously and had informed them both that she expected a dog by September. A man who cooked with precision and watched the world like it owed him nothing and gave it everything anyway. She hadn't planned any of it. She'd signed a contract and walked into a life that was already happening. And she had the persistent, clarifying feeling, not dramatic, just deeply true, that she would have missed everything that mattered if she'd been looking for something smaller.